All right, let's do this. UFC 273, we got it going on. Five big fights that we're going to be talking about today, starting from the top down. We're going to be going over our Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie first. Second, we're going to be talking about the rematch, Aljamain Sterling versus Peter Yan. Third, we're going to be talking about the people's main event, Burns versus Chimaev, going to be a crazy fight. Fourth, we're going to be talking about Dern versus Tisha Torres. That's going to be another close one. But the one we're going to be leaving out is the Alexei Oleinik fight because he was supposed to be fighting Ilir Latifi. I checked today. They removed him. I don't know if he dropped out again because of, I don't know, travel restrictions or something. I don't know what happened. But we're just not going to be talking about that fight. It says Oleinik's going to be fighting this Jared Vanderaa guy. Maybe he is. I don't know. If he is, he's probably going to choke him out. So that's going to be my prediction. Oleinik chokes him out. We're not going to be talking about it. So let's get this started. First off, Volkanovski versus Chan Sung Jung. And the way that I'm kind of going to do this is I'm basing my predictions mostly just off of their performance in their last fight. And like Sterling and Yan, if they fought before, we're going to base it off that. So we're going to base it off the recent history. Because like if you have Poirier and McGregor fighting, like Poirier versus McGregor 2, if you base that fight off of the first time that they fought, you're going to say McGregor's going to kill him. But if you base that fight off of like McGregor's most recent long fight besides Cowboy, off of like the Khabib fight, you're going to be like, oh, Connor's not quite the same person. So it's better just base it off the most recent fight that we have. So if that makes sense, that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie. So not much to talk about physically here. The matchup is pretty much equal. Korean Zombie had like a half-inch reach on him. And then I think like a 2.5-inch leg reach. So physically, they're the same height. They're pretty much the same weight. I think Volkanovski might fight a little heavier, but I don't think that's going to be very important. They're around the same age too. Volkanovski's 33, Korean Zombie's 35. So pretty old guys coming towards the end of their career. Age, not a factor. Size, not a factor, most likely. I do think Volkanovski's going to be a little stronger, but I don't think that's going to play a big role in this. So let's get into their performances in their last fight. So, Volkanovski's last fight, I think we all remember, crazy 5-round banger against Brian Ortega. And going into that fight, I was honestly a little worried. I thought that if anyone could pull it off, it would probably be Ortega. Obviously, Holloway, you can argue that Holloway pulled it off in their second fight, maybe even the first fight too. They were both pretty close. But besides Holloway, I think the next guy up is definitely, at this moment, or at the moment that they fought, was Brian Ortega. He was the number 2 contender right behind Holloway. He's 15-1. He's got that crazy jiu-jitsu, and he's also got decent striking. So it was looking kind of scary for Volkanovski going in, but, you know, he dominated him. He absolutely dominated him. I think the scorecards were, one ref had it 49-46. One had it 50-45, which is probably more accurate. And then the third one had it 50-44. So that's all 5 rounds won by Volkanovski and an 8-10 round on that last judges scorecard. So definitely domination there. And it surprised me, probably surprised a lot of people. So that really showed us that Volkanovski is the real deal. He's not just some guy that can only beat Max Holloway. And the way he beat him was also pretty impressive because if we look at this matchup, Korean Zombie versus Volkanovski, you think if you play it out in your head, the only way that the Korean Zombie wins is by pulling off like a twister or something crazy like he's done before, like some crazy submission. And you have to ask yourself, if Brian Ortega could not submit the Volkanovski, then can the Korean Zombie? I personally don't think so. Because Volkanovski, he gave Ortega literally every chance that he could. Like, he had him in a tight mounted guillotine. Like, anyone else would have tapped that. He had him in, and right after that, he got him in a tight triangle. And anyone else would have tapped that. Volkanovski didn't tap. He was fine. His face was ready. He had veins popping out of his head and everything. You could tell that he was struggling a little bit, but nonetheless, he didn't tap. Then he got on top and ground and pounded and won that round for most of the judges. I'd say the 2 last judges, 49-46, questionable again, but nonetheless, couldn't get submitted. He had him in a tight darce later in like the 4th round. Got out of that darce like it was no problem. So I think Volkanovski might just be unsubmittable. And that poses obviously a big question to the Korean Zombie because The only way he wins is by submission. He's not going to outstrike Volkanovski. It's not going to happen. No one does that. He's not going to outlast him. He's not going to, have like that crazy pressure that Volkanovski's going to fold to. It's probably going to be the opposite way. As we saw, the pressure, although Ortega did have like a moment at the end of that 5th round, which was pretty impressive because he has insane cardio too, but the whole fight, Volkanovski was the one that was dictating the pace. And that's probably how it's going to go with anyone that he faces, and I think that's obviously how it's going to go with the Korean Zombie. So, really, I think the Korean Zombie's only chance is by some crazy spinning knockout, which is obviously possible. That's why I never say going into a fight that I know what's going to happen, because you don't know. It's fighting. Literally anything could happen. He could throw a spinning back fist and knock Volkanovski out, even though Volkanovski has a good chin. Again, probably not going to happen, but it could. Like I said, the things that I took from it was a crazy pace and the pressure. I don't know how he wasn't submitted. I don't think he can be submitted. He had heavy leg kicks that kind of controlled the fight, but those heavy leg kicks did lead to a takedown. So maybe, if Chan Sung Jung can kind of use that black belt in judo that he has to catch those kicks, get in the clinch, throw Volkanovski down, maybe he can do something with that. But then he's got to hold him down, and that's a whole nother topic up for debate. So he just picked Ortega apart, and I honestly think at this moment in time, Brian Ortega is better than Korean Zombie. So I don't know, but Korean Zombie did do some good things. His last fight he beat Dan Ige, who was an up and coming contender. He was ranked number 8, so he wasn't as good as Ortega being ranked number 2. Ortega was 15-1. If he had beat Volkanovski, that would have been just a huge deal. Dan Ige is not quite the same opponent, and also Korean Zombie did not quite beat him as convincingly. So, just basing it off of the results of the last fight, you can already see that everything is just in Volkanovski's favor. Some things that Korean Zombie did good against him was he had good calf kicks, and when he got Dan Ige to the ground, what really won it for him was keeping him in that body triangle and just getting that ground control and then kind of stealing the rounds that way. But honestly, like, the stand-up was pretty equal, and that's like a favorable thing to say for Korean Zombie. I don't know how the fight probably would have ended in a different result if they were standing the entire time. Some bad things that I saw is that the later the fight went, it was the opposite of Volkanovski with Korean Zombie. He was started up here, ended with his hands down here. Volkanovski starts here and ends here, and he starts with crazy pressure and ends with crazy pressure. If Korean Zombie doesn't have that 5-round cardio and he drops his hand while Volkanovski's putting on that crazy pressure, then he's screwed. There's nothing else that's going to happen. But like I said, I think once it gets into the later rounds, I'm probably going to say round 3, I think the pressure from Volkanovski and the skill is just going to be too much. So for that reason, I'm going Volkanovski round 3. I'm going to say an overhand right. He's going to drop Korean Zombie, hit him with some ground punches, TKO him. That is my prediction for UFC 273 main event. All right, so let's hop into the second fight. We have the co-main event between Aljamain Sterling and Peter Yan. We have the rematch. Everyone knows how that last fight ended. We had the Peter Yan illegal knee into the 4th round. Peter Yan probably was up 2-1, but it was honestly pretty close. But you could see the tide of the fight completely turn, just like Yan does in most of his fights. Aljo had some early success and some honestly like really good early success. He hit Yan with 2 pretty clean flying knees early in that 1st round. But as all of Yan's opponents do, he kind of used too much energy, began to fade. All the strikes that he was throwing, Yan was absorbing, and he was wasting energy, and Yan wasn't taking enough damage for it to matter for Sterling. So he just came out of the gates, too fast, too crazy, and Yan wore him down. And the longer the fight went, the more powerful Yan got, the more the fight turned into Yan's favor, and that's the reason that Sterling gets all the flack. Like, if you go in his Instagram comments, literally all you'll see is like clown emojis and paper champ and everything like that, because it was pretty obvious that Peter Yan was the better fighter. Sterling kind of quit, I would say. Obviously it was an illegal knee, So you should be disqualified. But it's just hard calling Aljamain the champion when you can clearly see that Jan was going to win that fight, or at least going to win the fourth round, and had a very, very heavy lead and some momentum going for him into that fifth round. So who knows if Sterling would have even made it through the fifth round. Personally, I don't think he would have. I think there would have been a TKO in that fifth round. But I think this fight is going to go different. Jan, obviously, he had that fight with Corey Sandhagen October 30th, about 6 months ago. So he's ready to go. He looked even better in the Sandhagen fight. I thought Sandhagen was a good matchup for him, but Jan did what he does to everyone else. He kind of let Corey take that first round and then just figured him out, and he read him, and he poured it on him. And, he did kind of, leave some openings for Aljo to plan on. If they're smart, if his trainer saw it, if Aljo saw it. I know they watched Corey Sandhagen's fight probably more than I have, which is a lot. So if they did, they definitely would have seen that early in the fight, Sandhagen was landing some nice body jabs. That's really what did the most damage to Jan throughout that fight. And that's because Jan fights with his hands up here. And when you do that, you block everything coming to the head, but you leave the body open to things like body shots. Sandhagen realized that and was pretty successful with the body shots. And Sterling, the one thing that he was successful with early in the fight was the flying knees. He had two that connected pretty well in that first round. So I'm pretty basic on this decision. I think the fight's going to be a lot closer. I think Jan's going to probably win by decision. But I think if Sterling does have a chance, he needs to hit Jan with body shots. First of all, he needs to come out of the gates much more composed. He needs to not expend so much energy. If he's failing a takedown attempt, he needs to just not waste energy, not have Jan lying on him like he was last fight. And he just needs to be more relaxed, needs to be more conservative with his movements. He needs to kind of mirror the way that Jan fights. Take it easy at the beginning, and then the further you go, the better you get, and you can empty out the gas tank that way. I think if Sterling does that, and I think if he focuses on those body shots, like I said, and maybe gets lucky with a flying knee after that, guard up here, body shot, Petr Yan drops his guard, and then hit him with a flying knee. I think it's possible that Sterling can pull it off, but I think even though this fight's most likely, I don't want to say definitely because you never know, this fight is most likely going to be closer than last time. I think Jan's going to pull it out, and I think it's going to look something like a Petr Yan 48-47 decision. I could see Aljo taking maybe round 1 and 2, or maybe round 1 and 3 or something like that. But I think he's going to maybe have some cardio problems, and I think Jan's going to pour it on him towards the end. So I'm going to say UFC 273 co-main event. We're going to go Petr Yan beats Aljamain Sterling via decision, 48-47, maybe 48-46 if Jan can get a 10-8 round like what was probably going to happen in that fifth round in the last fight. So that is my prediction for the UFC 273 co-main event. Moving on, now we have what I would call the people's main event. This is the fight that I think I might be more excited for than the Jan versus Sterling fight. It's definitely close. Maybe I'm biased. I'm a big Khamzat Chimaev fan, but this fight is going to be insane. And the reason is because of the stylistic matchup. We have Khamzat Chimaev, who, if you haven't seen him, you have seen him. Everyone's seen him. He's arguably the biggest name in UFC right now, the most talked about guy, especially with this fight coming up. And his wrestling is just superior. He can out-wrestle anyone, it seems like. Obviously, he hasn't faced too strong of competition. His last fight was against Li Jingliang, who was ranked number 11, I believe, in the welterweight division. And he got ragdolled, obviously. Just like in all of Khamzat's fights, it looks like he's not even trying. Looks like he's just sparring with, it's like in jiu-jitsu if you had a black belt, just having fun against like a brown belt or a purple belt or something. Or sometimes even a white belt, He just out-wrestles everyone, and it's insane. It's exciting to watch. No one knows where the roof is on this guy. And the other thing that's exciting about him is he's not just a wrestler. His striking is, as far as we've seen, and obviously we haven't seen much of it in the UFC, since he's mauled all three of his opponents besides Gerald Meerschaert, and all that took was one straight right. right down the pipe, right on the chin, knocked him out. So obviously he has the power. We haven't seen, his counter striking ability in the UFC or anything like that. But if you look back at his fights in, some of his previous promotions that he's fought in, I think back in Sweden, he has some very, very good highlights. He has a crazy uppercut that I'm sure you've seen. And against that guy, he's knocked that guy down, I think, twice in one round. I'm pretty sure he finished him in the first round, maybe early in the second round, something like that. But his striking looked elite. And to have better than elite, I don't even know what word you would use, world class. To have world class wrestling and what seems to be elite striking is just so rare. And to have the determination, the mindset to be a psychopath like Khamzat is, it had to have all those things culminate. It really feels like we might, be watching the come up of the first ever 3 weight class world champion. I might be getting a little ahead of myself. Who knows? Because the guy he's facing, Gilbert Burns, number 2 in the welterweight division right now, and it just as Khamzat's world class in wrestling, Gilbert Burns is world class in BJJ. His jiu-jitsu is off the charts, probably arguably the best in the UFC, at least in the welterweight division, I'd say. So it's hard to see how this fight plays out. A thing to consider is Khamzat is 27 years old, and Gilbert Burns is 8 years older. He's 35. He's really, honestly, on his way out. I know we have a 43-year-old light heavyweight champion right now, Glover Teixeira, but that age gap is a big deal, and just that means that Khamzat, even though I think he's already better than Burns, he has more potential to grow. So Khamzat's only getting better, and Gilbert Burns' graph is only going downhill, in my opinion. Maybe something crazy happens. I don't know. Maybe he's been training harder than he ever has in his whole life. Who knows? But I expect to see a better Khamzat than we saw against Li Jingliang, which is scary to imagine. And I expect to see the same Gilbert Burns that we saw against Wonderboy Thompson in his most recent fight. And that Gilbert Burns was not that impressive. The one thing that stands out most to me is how heavy Gilbert Burns was on his lead leg against Wonderboy. Now, I think maybe that's because Wonderboy has that wide karate stance, and maybe Gilbert wasn't worried about leg kicks, although maybe he should have been. Maybe he was just trying to mirror Wonderboy's stance, or he just wasn't afraid of takedowns, so he had that wide stance. But if he comes out with that wide stance against Khamzat, Khamzat's going to take him down. And, he's probably going to take him down anyways, but especially if he comes out in the same stance that he had against Wonderboy. It's 100% as sure as anything. The question is, when Khamzat does take him down, which is most likely going to happen unless he knocks him out with one punch like he did for Gerald Meerschaert, who was also a submission artist, had the most submissions in the middleweight division. Can Gilbert Burns use his defensive jiu-jitsu, get Khamzat in his guard, and maybe pull off a triangle or something like that? I don't know. I don't necessarily see it happening, but honestly, if anyone has a chance besides Kamaru Usman to beat Khamzat ever at this point, it seems like it's going to be Gilbert Burns. I honestly think Khamzat, he's been calling out Israel Adesanya. I don't see that fight going well for Israel Adesanya. I really don't. I think Khamzat can take down whoever he wants, and I think he can take down Burns. And I don't think that Burns is in a place where he can, use his defensive jiu-jitsu to submit Khamzat. I don't see Khamzat letting that happen. I don't see him, falling into a triangle, because it's the most obvious outcome if you play it through in your head for Burns to win. There's really no other way that I think he wins. Now, he does have really good stand-up, underrated stand-up. So it's kind of hard to say whether Khamzat or Burns' stand-up is better. I think Khamzat. Burns did knock down Kamaru Usman in that first round. Then he got destroyed the second round. That jab, did wonders for Usman. Knocked Gilbert Burns out in the third round with a TKO. And I see the same thing happening in this Khamzat versus Burns fight. I think Burns gets out of round 1, which is pretty generous of a thing to say, considering the opinions that most people have on Khamzat, and considering what he's already done to his opponents. He's absorbed one significant strike in his 4 fights in the UFC. So I think Burns gets out of the first round, but I think in the second round, I see Khamzat either dropping him on the feet or maybe getting a single leg and then maybe hitting him with some elbows and then finishing it on the ground. I see TKO by punches. Round 2, Hamzat Chimaev. I think that's gonna be the outcome for the people's main event at UFC 273. All right, so next up we have our first women's bout. The fight 3 fights away from the main event, and it's going to be between the number 5 ranked strawweight in the women's division and the number 7 ranked strawweight in the women's division, and that is Mackenzie Dern versus Tecia Torres. The live Vegas odds have it at -110 for both fighters, so Vegas can't pick, and it was kind of hard for me to pick too. I've seen, I think, 3 or 4 other people's predictions, and I haven't had one person that I've seen that has picked Mackenzie Dern to win. It seems like everyone else thinks that Tecia Torres has the better striking, which I would agree upon, but not to the extent that other people say. I think Mackenzie Dern can hang with Tecia Torres on the feet. I think that cardio may become an issue for Mackenzie Dern. Tecia Torres, in her last fight against Angela Hill, she had very good output for the entire fight, all 3 rounds. And she kind of fought with like some flutters, like some quick combos with her hands, and she threw a few body kicks as well that kind of led to her getting taken down, which could become interesting in the fight against Mackenzie Dern. But I think the cardio, you would have to say, lies in the favor of Tecia Torres. Now, Mackenzie Dern does not have bad cardio, and I also don't think that she has very bad stand-up. I think people don't give her the give her stand-up the credit that it deserves. And I think we're going to see that she can hang with Tecia Torres on the feet. And I can't say the same for the ground, because Mackenzie Dern is a legit world class. She's an ADCC world champ in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you can see when she gets her opponents on the ground, it is like they're a fish out of water. Like, there is nothing they can do. And we saw that with her last opponent, who was Marina Rodriguez, who is one of the best, probably the number 1 title contender, maybe besides Carla Esparza, in the most stacked division in the UFC, which is the women's strawweight division. And Mackenzie Dern did lose that fight by decision, but it's not a bad loss for her. And she did get outstruck a little bit, but when she was on the ground, she had 2 times where she had Marina Rodriguez's arm in a nasty position, had an arm bar ready, and then Marina got saved by the bell. So I really think that if Mackenzie Dern can catch one of Tecia Torres' leg kicks, like we saw Angela Hill do at kind of the beginning of their fight, which was in August of 2021, I think that if Mackenzie Dern can get her to the ground, it's going to be trouble for Tecia Torres. Now, that being said, Tecia Torres has fought all the best women in the women's strawweight division. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Jessica Andrade, Rose Namajunas, you name it, she's fought them, and the only people that she's lost to are those, title contenders or, world champions. So, and she's never been submitted. That's another thing. So, it's kind of crazy for me to say. I understand why people are saying Tecia Torres by decision, but I really think that Mackenzie Dern can pull off the armbar. I think she can pull off a submission, and I think I'm going to have to go against the grain on this one. Officially, I'm going to say Dern by decision, 29-28, but I have on my paper here in parentheses, armbar, ? Because don't be surprised if you see her pull off an armbar against Tecia Torres and submit her for the first time ever, just like she almost did against Marina Rodriguez. I think it's going to be a good fight. Kind of hard to call, but I'm going to go against the grain. Mackenzie Dern gets it done against Tecia Torres. Alrighty, so moving on to the final fight that we'll be going over and predicting on the stacked UFC 273 main card. We have the middleweight bout, short notice, between Kelvin Gastelum and Dricus du Plessis. Dricus du Plessis was supposed to fight on the undercard of UFC 273, but I think Imavov had travel restrictions that he had to deal with, so he wasn't able to make it out to Jacksonville. So they moved up Dricus du Plessis from the undercard to the main card to fight Gastelum, which is a big step up in competition. You're talking about a guy in Gastelum who he's lost the last 5 of his 6 fights, but he's fought the best that the middleweight division has to offer. Cannonier, Adesanya, Darren Till, all those guys. And he's lost all by decision. He's never been knocked out. None of those guys were able to knock him out. What's interesting is Dricus du Plessis, he's 16-2, and he's never been in a fight that did not end in a finish. He was finished twice and finished the rest of his 16 opponents. So that's kind of an interesting stat line going into this fight. I think it's obvious who has the experience here. That's in favor of Gastelum. He's kind of a seasoned vet. The stand-up, the style between the two fighters, it's going to be interesting because one thing I saw on Dricus du Plessis' last fight against Trevin Giles is he got the knockout in round 2, but he just looked very stiff. And whenever Trevin Giles would throw some combinations at him, come with a little flurry attack, he would just absorb it. He would absorb it kind of through his guard, but some shots would get through. And I think when you're fighting a guy like Gastelum, who is kind of known for those flurrying combinations, doing real damage to his opponents, and a guy who's light on his feet and not stiff like Dricus du Plessis is, I think the style has to be in favor of Kelvin Gastelum. And when you mix that in with, the experience that he has in that division, and his last fight against Cannonier, that was a 48-47 decision, and now Cannonier is most likely going to be fighting Israel Adesanya for the title in the future. It doesn't look good for du Plessis. Now, anything can happen. He has legit power, like we saw when he knocked out Trevin Giles, but I just see him being too stiff. I see Gastelum, using his really good footwork like he's always shown his UFC career. I see him kind of using that to slowly break down Dricus du Plessis. I don't think he finishes him. I think it's a 3-round fight, so it's probably going to end up something like a 28-29, maybe a 30-27. And I'm going to have to go Gastelum by decision. Now, I think the funny thing is that the live odds, the Vegas live odds, actually have du Plessis as they have Gastelum as the underdog, which is just surprising because if you watch the film, obviously looking at the records in the last 6 fights for Gastelum doesn't look too good, but when you look at the film, I really think the Gastelum is the better fighter. So we'll see. I think Gastelum decision, 28-29 for the final fight of the UFC 273 main card. So those are my predictions. I'll be doing a follow-up video to see how I did, kind of to hold myself accountable. And if someone like Dricus du Plessis pulls it off, or the 3 guys that are big underdogs in the top 3 fights pull it off, then I will be able to address that and kind of see where I went wrong in predicting these fights and analyzing it. And I think it's going to be exciting. I'm very pumped. I think we have 10 days left. It's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be one for the record books. It's already looking like the most stacked card ever. So hopefully these guys come through. No one gets an injury in these next 10 days, and we can just enjoy this stacked UFC 273 card. So thank you for watching, and hopefully we can be 5 out of 5 come next Saturday.